Yes, this movie is so good that I actually have to talk about it again. Due to the fact that I really love this movie. Hello, Freedom Guy 55 here again. Want to actually talk about Drive again. I wanted to develop some sort of particular kind of an excuse, but who gives a shit? I'm going to talk about it again. Period. Done deal. Anyway, the one thing that I want to talk about is basically why it is really so Oscar worthy. Why certain particular kind of things within the film actually are needed to, in some ways, from my perspective, need to be talked about. Well, one of the actual things I would think is the definitely sound and sound mixing, sound editing and sound mixing. There are certain instances within the film that I actually think work extremely well within the ways of sound, such as like within the scene of when the beginning sequence when he's actually driving the guys around. You hear all at the same time. You hear the rev of the engine. You also have the police scanner on inside the car, so you're hearing everything that he's hearing, right? And you're also hearing a kind of like helicopter on the background. So you're hearing the rev of the engine, the helicopter in the background, and in the outside that's looking for him, the cop helicopter. I'm sorry, this is going to be actually spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie, I have to actually say, why haven't you seen the fucking movie? But anyway, let's get back to this. The one thing is, there's a helicopter outside that he's hearing. There's the police scanner he's hearing. All these elements working all at once in this kind of sound, in this, I guess, in this embodiment of sound that works so unbelievably well. And you're taking, in some ways, his perspective. So you know exactly what he is. I mean, the time when actually the cops spot him, and then he has to actually dart the gun, or gun the engine, right? I was just like going. I was like, once the cops found him, I was like, oh shit, and then all of a sudden he's driving. I'm like, oh okay, So you're kind of like that was just so much of a good scene of how the sound works so well within the rev of the engine, the all these kind of different sounds working all together, and kind of almost putting yourself in the place of the driver itself. It was just amazing. I loved that scene. That beginning sequence was so unbelievably awesome. I mean, it is the best opening sequence I have ever seen in any film this year. But let's go on, because this movie is actually even much better than going into the film. The film is actually, would be slow to other people, but to me, I didn't find the pacing that bad. I've actually mentioned it in my review. But the thing is, there are also these other scenes that talk, in some ways, are basically part of like sound editing, especially when the scenes come into this like extreme intensity of violence. Like there's this one sequence where he's actually waiting on two people. One is a woman, and he winds up opening the door, and then a woman comes around, and then she has a bag or whatnot, and she puts it in. She gets in the back seat, and then he's waiting on the other guy. And there's this like intense silence in the movie, just very quiet, very quiet. And you get this intense silence, and then the guy comes out. It's still quiet, and then boom, 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 gunshots just come out of nowhere, and you're like, oh my god, that scared the unbelievable shit out of me. I was like, holy crap. And then all of a sudden the car darts and you're going into this sequence. And I'm just like, wow, that was amazing of how... It's amazing in the way it was edited, shot, and even the concept of, using silence and then automatically, kind of bombarding you with this huge sound of gunshots. And the gunshots in the movie sounded like gunshots. They didn't sound like the usual gunshots that you would hear in movies like... No, they sounded like gunshots. And that was good. That was really good. Also, I'd have to actually talk about another sequence in the movie when all the guys come in on them to, pick up their money, basically because this is like a botch job, and they come into the the hotel room that they're at. And they start firing shots, and there's blood everywhere, and a boom, boom, boom. And he's like, and then he winds up killing all the guys, and he's covered in blood in his face. His face is like covered in blood and such, and he's like, and after the whole sequence, because you're just intense when all of this stuff comes around, and he's looking outside of that threshold, and he's like, got the wide eyes, and he just slowly backs away into it. And the interesting part about that is how that one shot, as he's backing into the actual bathroom of the hotel room, is just, I looked at it and I was like just amazed, because you're feeling exactly what he's feeling. Is there another guy coming around? And he's just coming. I'm sorry, that was just awesome. I mean, I'm like, wow. And it was just so, that was such a good scene. That was such a good scene. And then, oh God. And then, of course, there's the scene where he winds up getting away from the other car, right? And you wind up actually seeing, and the interesting thing about action movies is that they show like 300 different cuts. It's like boom, 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 right? In certain different ways. And then, and the one thing is that this movie just doesn't do that. The car flips over and there's two shots. One is a shot in slow motion, shot from the back seat of the car, and you're looking out the window at the actual car that's flipping over. And then the second scene is when the car lands and you've got a close-up of the wheel. And within those two shots, you actually know what happens. You know how some people say less is more? That scene was less is more. Period. You knew exactly what happened. It was amazing. But though, I mean, going through those scenes, seeing the cinematography, the editing, the sound mixing, and all of that stuff just is so amazing in that movie. It works so unbelievably well. I'm getting emotional here, so I'm sorry. I know. Next is the acting. I have to say, acting, nobody misses a beat. Ron Perlman finally is in a movie that is actually not shit, and thank God for that. As far as anything else, what would I say is the best actor in the movie? What would I say would be the best actor in the movie? Well, I do like Ryan Gosling's performance. I do really love his performance in this movie. Yet, at the same time, I do not think he's the best actor. All the performances work extremely well. There is not one person that is a weak performance or weak link in this movie. But, at the same time, I'd have to actually give the Oscar, my particular kind of opinion of the Oscar nomination of Best Supporting Actor to Albert Brooks. I'm saying Albert Brooks. Because I have to give, I'm sorry how I say Albert. I don't know, it sounds weird, doesn't it? Anyway, but Albert Brooks. He is so unbelievably good in this movie. I mean, this is the one thing that's really weird about Albert Brooks' character, okay? He has played so many other characters in his life that has been so quirky and lovable. I mean, he's been playing all of these quirky, lovable characters in his entire career. He takes a long sabbatical from acting, right? He does voiceovers in certain movies and such. And then he comes back as an actor again, and he unbelievably shines in a completely different role than he has ever played. That is amazing to me. His performance is so amazing. I loved his performance. He deserves an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He does. Give him a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Period. Albert Brooks deserves it for this movie. Period. Okay? I'm bringing out my fingers here. Come on. You do it. Like the Academy's going to watch this. Anyway. But that's my particular opinion. I mean, he works so well. And, you know, it kind of reminds me, I mean, this character kind of reminds me of, like, the Peter Fonda character in Once Upon a Time in the West. You see, Sergio Leone wanted to get, there's the story about Sergio Leone who did Once Upon a Time in the West. And he winds up getting this, Peter Fonda to play the bad guy in the movie, this ruthless bad guy. Because the one thing is that Peter Fonda played so much of these lovable, quirky type of characters that you loved. Well, actually not quirky, but lovable characters in his whole entire career. And then he plays this evil, ruthless bastard in this movie. And all of a sudden, you know, he wanted to actually have, you know, Sergio Leone wanted to have people say, oh my God, it's Peter Fonda, you know, in the movie. And in some ways, Albert Brooks plays that kind of like Peter Fonda character in Once Upon a Time in the West. He's played these kind of quirky, lovable characters, and then he automatically comes back into the movies as playing this like ruthless bastard, and it's just amazing to me. So I'm sorry. Albert Brooks deserves an Oscar. I am sorry for repeating this, but he does. Period. He deserves an Oscar. Give it to him. Thank you. Moving on. As far as anything else, it does deserve Best Director as much as anything else because the scenes coalesce so well together. But the fact that you could tell, and this is the one thing I always love about directors. Nicholas Winding Refn, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He really, you could tell, and this is what I always love about watching movies. When I see a movie, and I know that a director knows exactly what he is doing in the director's seat. That's where I go, I am really giving huge recommendations for this director. Because once I see that in a movie, I am amazed and awestruck. And this is the second Oscar that has to go to this character, to this director. It has to. So basically, give the director, Nicholas Winding Refn, an Oscar nomination for director. Just give it to him. Please, give it to him. Please, give it to him. Because the one thing is, when a director knows exactly what he's doing, that is where you need to give it to him. So, Albert Brooks, Best Supporting Actor. Nicholas Winding Refn. Yes. And I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but I'm just like really so emotional about this film. I had to talk about it again because I really did love this film. And I was taken by, when I was reviewing this film, by the individuals that were basically probably not going to like this film due to the fact that it was like boring to them or whatever. It's too artsy. But to my perspective, I saw this film. It had extreme intensity when you actually, I mean, you felt the intensity when it needed for you to feel the intensity. And I loved this movie. I really did. Many people do need to see this film, but the problem is that I know that there are going to be prudes out there that are going to say, yeah, this movie was so boring. I can't believe it. Or some sort of shit like that, because I don't get used to those films. I'm sorry. Or some sort of shit. And, you know, I understand that to a degree. I mean, there are certain things where you want to see in a film that you just want to turn off your mind. But in this movie, in movies, I don't really want to turn off my mind. I want to watch a movie that does actually have a director, actors, and all of the other people in the crew really, to my perspective, when I look at the movie and say, they are working unbelievably hard. That's what I want to see when I see a film like this. So how long have I gone? Wow, 14 minutes. I think I have to stop here. But at the same time, I'm telling you, nominate it for an Oscar for Best Director and Best Supporting Actor. Period. Hands down. That's my opinion. But anyway, that's it. And I thank you for your time, and have a nice day.